a 9-year-old girl, barely 60 pounds. On March 6, 1959, she stepped off her porch with 7 boxes of cookies and vanished forever. This isn't some tale of a kid getting lost. It's about a monster picking the most vulnerable, tiny soul he could find outside. 62 years would pass, involving 3 eras of investigators and a single jar in storage, before the truth finally surfaced. To grasp the scale of this tragedy, we must return to that Friday, seeing Candy Rogers for the person she truly was. Back in 1959, Spokane was the sort of town where children roamed freely and locks on front doors were rarely used. In West Central, simple houses and friendly faces defined the blocks. It was a tight-knit community where parents didn't worry about the time. Anxiety was non-existent then. Living above a corner store on West Mission, Candy stayed with Elaine, a local teacher of history and gym. Family was close, and her dog, Shep, was her constant. Standing 4'4" and quite timid, being a bluebird meant everything to her. Cookie season kicked off on March 6, 1959. After school let out at 3:15, she rushed to her leader's home by 3:30. Her goal was clear: earn a badge and win a trip to summer camp. Since she was small, 7 boxes were her limit. Carrying more was impossible. Waiting until the 4 p.m. start, she spent 30 minutes snacking on oatmeal cookies with her grandma. After playing with her dog, she listed the houses she'd visit, confident in making sales. Fear wasn't there, only pure, youthful joy. Right at 4 o'clock, she braved the chilly March weather to begin her rounds. In Washington, the late winter sun disappears quite early. Street lamps flickered on by 5:40. Having been told to return by dusk, her absence at 5:30 prompted her grandfather to go searching. He scouted the area and questioned everyone nearby. Sadly, no one had caught a glimpse of her in quite some time. Elaine returned from the salon to a parent's worst nightmare. Relatives flooded the neighborhood immediately, and authorities were notified once the sun set. Many other scouts were canvassing the area that night. Scores of children wore identical outfits while carrying those familiar blue and white boxes. Pinpointing her movements became a nightmare for police. Reported sightings were unreliable until 9 p.m., when a discovery altered the entire investigation. Up on Doomsday Hill, along Pettit Drive, mint containers weren't just sitting there, they were strewn haphazardly all over the pavement. Discarded. It appeared as though they were tossed out of a speeding vehicle's window by someone fleeing the scene in a hurry. This path of debris headed south, crossing the bridge and leaving her home behind. A single package yielded 1 incomplete finger mark. Federal agents analyzed the print, yet it led nowhere. By 9 that evening, the grim reality set in for the city. She hadn't strayed. An abduction had occurred. The mystery remained. Why her, among so many others out on that freezing Friday with their 7 small boxes? The solution was right there, yet hidden for 6 decades. By Saturday morning, news had spread, drawing over 1,200 volunteers to help. A massive force gathered before dawn, including soldiers, scouts, and everyday workers, all converging on the neighborhood to find the missing child. Authorities staged their operations near the bridge where the boxes were found. Military choppers were deployed to scan the terrain from above. Lacking modern tech like satellites or mobiles, they relied on a few discarded items, a mystery print, and a dead-end bridge trail. Tragedy struck again on Saturday when a search chopper hit electrical wires and plummeted straight into the cold waters of the river. 3 brave airmen lost their lives in the accident: Miles Ray, William McDonald, and Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fout. 2 men survived the crash. 3 lives were lost trying to save one, leaving a mourning city still searching for answers. An eerie quiet hung over the town as thousands of leads poured in from every corner of the nation, one after another. Police chased every clue, screening local ex-convicts in an era without digital records. A few names rose to the top of their list. Solid proof remained elusive for over 2 weeks. Then, on March 21st, 2 hunters 7 miles away stumbled upon something in the forest. Near an old quarry, they spotted a chilling sight: 2 tiny shoes neatly positioned at the base of a large evergreen tree. They weren't lost by accident. They were placed. After alerting their superiors, a fresh search team mobilized at first light the following day. It didn't take long before a volunteer cleared away some forest debris and finally located the remains of little Candy Rogers. Hidden beneath thick brush 50 yards from the path, she was discovered by a team including future police captain Richard Obering. That haunting scene never left him. Even 62 years later, when the killer's identity surfaced, she had been strangled to death. The murderer used a piece of her own clothing, a part of the slip she wore that afternoon, to take her life. Her ankles were tied with matching fabric. Waist bruising hinted at the use of a rope, though no such binding was recovered nearby. Doctors uncovered signs of a brutal assault, making an already senseless act of violence feel even more sickening and depraved. Though forensic science was limited then, those officers saved everything, unknowingly keeping vital biological samples for future breakthroughs in DNA testing. Finding her body permanently altered the local culture, leaving a scar on the city that would be felt for many years. Once trusting parents began clutching their kids tighter, monitoring the sidewalks from behind curtains, and enforcing newfound, rigid safety boundaries. This tragedy turned into a cautionary tale passed down through families for decades. Despite the heartbreak, investigators finally held the proof. Investigators possessed a genetic trace without the means to process it. Their only play was waiting for technology to catch up with the evidence. However, a predator soon entered the picture, derailing the entire search and leading authorities down a dead end for 4 decades. Each mystery we cover here represents more than just a narrative. We spend weeks scouring archives and validating details to reconstruct the lives of those taken. Producing one video requires 15 days of deep investigation and countless late hours. Our commitment stems from the belief that these victims still merit our remembrance. To help us continue revealing the facts behind these cold cases, please hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on the most impactful moment in the comments. For additional resolutions to unsolved crimes, check out the links provided in the description. Returning to the story, police in Spokane spent years certain they identified the killer. Authorities focused on a specific suspect with a background and clues that appeared damning. That theory stood for 40 years, yet it was entirely inaccurate. The most frustrating part is that the actual culprit never surfaced in any lead, testimony, or official file during 62 years of digging. As police pursued a phantom, the true perpetrator resided nearby, started a family, and passed away without ever facing scrutiny. That man was Hugh Bayon Morse. Being part of the local motorcycle club, he blended into the neighborhood perfectly, without ever drawing a second glance from anyone. After the girl vanished, he joined the search parties. He patrolled the blocks with heartbroken residents and cops, hunting for a child he likely knew was gone. His residence was only a short distance from hers. Furthermore, 4 years prior, he was caught targeting 2 scouts selling treats door to door, a terrifying parallel to Candy. Within a year of her discovery, Morse killed 2 more women locally before fleeing cross-country, racking up 7 more felonies until his 1961 arrest in Minnesota. He passed away in custody in April 2003 while serving double life terms. His patterns matched perfectly, specifically targeting children, but his chewing habit was the oddest link. Detectives discovered grape-scented gum at nearly every location he struck, creating a signature trail that tied his various offenses together. Back in 1959, a medical examiner spotted a violet mark on her clothes that smelled like fruit. This specific detail became a pillar of the entire police inquiry. With his reputation as a predator growing, that unverified blemish turned into the primary evidence against him, despite lacking any scientific proof. This guesswork eventually became treated as a fact, misdirecting every lead for 40 years until 2001 rolled around. Investigator Mindy Connolly sent the victim's attire to a laboratory. Technicians successfully extracted a biological sample and established a complete genetic map. For the first time in 42 years, police had hard evidence instead of theories. They compared it to Morse, but the results were negative, rendering the old clues irrelevant. Science cleared him. The data went into the Federal Registry, but it returned absolutely nothing. The actual murderer lacked a record that would have put him in the system. He had stayed completely under the radar for decades. Over 62 years, his name never graced a single police document or phone tip. He lived in plain sight while escaping all suspicion. This breakthrough happened for one specific reason. It wasn't just the cops or the modern tech. Though those played their parts, everything hinged on a choice made by a nameless officer back in 1959, decades before genetic science was even a concept. An officer placed the child's clothing in a glass jar and locked the lid. That simple act linked a 1959 tragedy to a 2021 resolution. It prevents moisture buildup and won't contaminate its contents. That vacuum seal from a pre-DNA era ended up providing the ultimate storage for future testing. When experts eventually unsealed that container in the early 2000s, the biological material was perfectly intact. The quality allowed for a total reconstruction, even though the original 1959 team had no idea what they were truly protecting. Yet they preserved it regardless. Brittany Wright, a Spokane native, heard Candy's name frequently as a kid, used primarily by her parents as a cautionary tale. Stay alert and never forget that poor girl. The tragedy became a fundamental part of local parenting for many years after it happened. Wright eventually pursued a career in forensics, joining the state's crime lab team. In 2018, as local police revisited their unsolved files, Candy's folder was assigned to her. This wasn't just a coincidence. That same year, California police utilized genetic genealogy to catch the Golden State Killer, who had eluded them for 40 years. The process involved checking crime scene samples against public family tree websites to locate potential cousins of the perpetrator. Researchers then mapped out lineages until a single identity emerged. Once that news broke globally, departments everywhere began wondering if their old cases could be solved. Spokane officials immediately explored this option, but they soon faced a massive obstacle. Despite being kept in good condition, the genetic material had broken down over 60 years and was mixed with outside pollutants. Wright reached out to a private lab in 2020, but they rejected the submission, claiming the sample was too far gone. That setback seemed like the final blow. The database was empty, and every other path was a dead end. Without genealogy, the search was over. Then Wright discovered a Texas-based facility called Othram, which focuses on the difficult cases that others usually avoid. They created a unique sequencing technique designed specifically for damaged or tiny amounts of organic material. In February 2021, she pitched the case to them. They agreed to try, so she sent the remaining evidence. With only a few droplets of evidence remaining, she shipped it to Texas. Othram succeeded in creating a profile and scanning the databases. The findings pointed to 3 siblings from the local area, all now dead. Their names were John Ray, James Andrew, and Terry Allen Hoff. DNA testing hit a wall since it could not distinguish between the siblings. Their genetic codes were nearly identical, making it impossible to tell which brother left his profile on the girl's dress. Cops needed a living heir. Just one brother had kids. It was the only lead they had. Stormont dialed the number of a daughter who had spent decades convinced her father took his own life due to mental health struggles. She was completely blindsided by the truth. Throughout 62 years of digging, the name John Ray Hoff never surfaced in a single police file, not as someone to watch, a witness, or even a footnote. During the media briefing, Detective Storm stated it bluntly. The man had not even been a blip on their screen until September 6, 2021. That date flipped the script. When Stormont reached out to Kathy Hoff, he introduced himself as a detective working an old homicide. Within 45 minutes of hanging up, she arrived at the Spokane police station. However, she already had a hunch. Rather than sitting around after that mysterious phone call, she jumped onto the internet. She started digging. During that brief 45-minute window, she uncovered the tragic tale of a 9-year-old girl killed in Spokane back in 1959 while out selling mint cookies. She stepped into the precinct already burdened by her own dark realizations. Kathy did not blink when asked for a cheek swab. The confirmation arrived on September 8, 2021. The biological evidence found on Candy's clothing was 2.9 million times more likely to belong to Kathy's father than some random stranger from the public. Her dad was definitely the source of that evidence. Yet, the investigation was not over. Since John Hoff had passed away, there would be no day in court. This meant the responsibility for total accuracy fell squarely on the shoulders of the detectives. They had to ensure the scientific proof was absolutely ironclad. They secured a legal order to dig up John Ray Hoff's remains on September 23, 2021. By October 1st, tests showed a 25 quintillion to 1 probability that the DNA on the clothes was his. That is a 25, followed by 18 zeros. A figure that massive leaves absolutely zero room for any lingering uncertainty. The mystery was finally unraveled. John Ray Hoff entered the world on August 11, 1938, right in Spokane. He spent his childhood on the 2500 block of West College Avenue. He was not some wandering stranger. He was a local face, someone familiar. Looking back, his youth was littered with red flags that signaled a dangerous trend. Back in 1955, at just 16, he broke out of a youth detention center near Olympia before being caught near Yakima. That run-in with police steered him toward the service. He enlisted in the United States Army at 17 and was stationed at the Nike missile batteries guarding Fairchild Air Force Base, situated just outside his home city. On March 6, 1959, his residence was on West Broadway Avenue. Candy's family lived on the West Mission Avenue block, barely 1 mile away from his front door. In 1961, 2 years following the little girl's murder, Hoff was picked up in West Spokane. He faced charges for a violent second-degree assault. In that attack, he snatched a woman, tore off her clothes, bound her limbs with her own garments. He throttled her with her own clothes, which was the exact signature left on Candy Rogers. The rope on Candy's neck was actually her own slip, with more of the fabric used to tie her ankles. A 1961 victim only survived because he was interrupted. Candy didn't make it, and Hoff only served 6 months. After that conviction, the army tossed him out with a dishonorable discharge for deserting. He jumped between jobs like door-to-door sales and lumber work, eventually getting a chemical burn at a packing plant. He wasn't exactly making something of himself. There is one haunting detail about Hoff that hits harder than the rest. He had a stepsister who was a 10-year-old campfire girl in 1959. She was actually assigned as Candy's big sister in the club, tasked with mentoring the little bluebird. She knew that girl well. She really cared for her, and when the city was turned upside down during the search, she was heartbroken. She sat beside John and just cried. She told him how much she missed her little friend and how tragic the whole thing was. He just sat there, stone-faced and silent. John Ray Hoff died in 1970 before he could ever face a judge. He ended it with a gunshot to the head. The timing was his daughter's 9th birthday, the very same age Candy was when he assaulted and killed her. Whether it was guilt or just coincidence, he took that secret to his grave. When police finally tracked down his burial site, they were stunned into silence. For 51 years, John Ray Hoff was in the same cemetery as Candy Rogers. The predator and the little girl he strangled were buried just yards apart for 5 decades. While her family mourned at her headstone, her killer was resting in the same soil, in the same city, completely unnoticed. He never once popped up on the police radar. Detective Storm recounted the moment he told Hoff's living relatives about the DNA match during a press conference. "I essentially flipped their entire history upside down," he explained. It wasn't an exaggeration, since Kathy always believed her father's suicide was due to depression. That was their family truth, how they rationalized the tragedy. Then, one chat with a cop replaced that story with a nightmare. Their grief didn't leave, it just became something far more twisted. When they realized he was buried near Candy, they chose to move him without being asked. They shifted his remains to a different park so Candy could have some peace. Candy's cousin Joanne was floored by the news. That kind gesture from the murderer's family wasn't exactly justice, but it was the only thing they could possibly offer. There's still the matter of Hoff's stepsister, who is now in her 70s. Storm tracked her down after the case was cold and broke the news. He said she was absolutely devastated. She remembered weeping next to John Hoff about losing Candy, telling him how crushed she was and how much she missed her little sister. He just sat there and listened without a word. She spent her whole life carrying that pain, never knowing the culprit was sitting right there, watching her cry. During the November 19th media briefing, officials aired Kathy Hoff's filmed account. She was remarkably forthcoming and didn't hold back. "I'm truly devastated by my father's choices and the horrific way he killed her. I hope she finds comfort in the fact that, while true legal retribution is impossible since he escaped punishment, his legacy is now forever stained. At least the family has their answer." That thought is certainly worth contemplating. There will never be a courtroom drama or a formal sentencing where a judge looks John Hoff in the eyes to brand him a criminal. He had already avoided those earthly consequences. However, Kathy provided the only closure left to give: validation. His identity is now inextricably linked to the horror he committed. The official files are corrected, and the truth is finally documented. It might not be traditional justice, but it carries weight. Retired Captain Richarding attended the press briefing. He was among the original team that discovered Candy's remains on March 22, 1959. He vividly remembers clearing away the brush and pine needles to find what John Hoff discarded. That haunting image stayed with him for 62 years. He survived long enough to finally hear the resolution. He thanked God for allowing him to witness the conclusion of this investigation. Clearly moved throughout the entire presentation, Detective Stormont was asked about the total number of hours dedicated to the Candy Rogers case over the last 6 decades. He declined to provide a specific number. Instead, he explained that this work is measured in entire professional lifetimes. 3 successive eras of investigators had carried this burden. Each generation passed the file along with the same unspoken request: never stop looking for her. The final group of detectives did exactly that. Candy's cousin, Joanne, wiped her eyes and spoke softly about the tragedy. She expressed how devastating the loss was, remembering a sweet child who was robbed of her future. Her time was cut tragically short. 9-year-old Candy Rogers had dreams of earning her scout badges. She loved her dog, Shep, her grandmother's baking, and her friendly neighbors. She had a right to grow up, but that was stolen on a freezing Friday in March 1959. Her killer was a 20-year-old soldier living nearby who never faced suspicion. We can only wonder who she might have become. What we do know is this: she was important enough that 1,200 volunteers searched for her. She mattered enough that 3 generations of police officers refused to let her file go cold. It mattered enough that a scientist who grew up hearing her story sent one final sample to a lab, refusing to believe the truth was lost forever. And she was significant enough that the killer's own daughter spoke to the world, ensuring everyone knew his name and the darkness he carried with him. 62 years, 8 months, and 13 days. That is the length of time Candy Rogers waited for this. The long countdown has finally reached its end. How many other mysteries from the 50s and 60s still have biological samples sitting in lockers, waiting for existing technology to finally provide a long overdue answer? John Hoff committed a nearly identical crime in 1961 but served only 6 months. If that penalty had matched his true depravity, would this case have ended differently? What does justice truly look like when a murderer's only real consequence is having his reputation ruined long after he has already passed away? The story of Candy Rogers is more than a cold case finally solved. It is a painful reminder that evil can hide in ordinary places, wearing an ordinary face, while innocence often has no defense except the care of a community. A little girl with cookies in her hands and hope in her heart should have grown up to live a full life. Instead, her future was stolen in a moment of cruelty that echoed through generations. But this tragedy also teaches something powerful. Truth may be delayed, but it does not lose its value. Even after 62 years, people still cared enough to keep searching. Detectives refused to let her be forgotten. Scientists refused to believe the evidence was beyond saving. And one preserved piece of proof became the bridge between a broken past and a long-awaited answer. This case reminds us why every child matters, why every victim deserves to be remembered, and why justice is not only about punishment, but also about truth. When a society chooses to protect memory, honor victims, and keep fighting for answers, it declares that even the smallest life is precious and never disposable.